Okay, thank you all for being here. I just got back within the hour from the 29th, I believe, annual Blue Mass at St. Patrick's in DC. It really is the unofficial, I guess, or the official maybe, kickoff to Police Week. And in addition to honoring our nation's 224 fallen officers just from 2022 alone, they honored 20 Washington Metropolitan Police officers who died in the line of duty in 2022. So the video you're about to watch, and we're gonna talk about it a little bit. We're gonna play it, describe it some more, and take your questions. It's just miraculous that we're not talking under different circumstances. It really, really is. So Deputy Chief Bob Blakely is going to explain the circumstances of this traffic stop that lead up to this horrific crash that by all accounts should have resulted in much, much worse outcomes than it did. So thank God for that. And then we'll take questions. But I'm going to step aside. Deputy Chief Blakely is going to describe just enough of what's happening, and then we'll lead up to the video and let you watch that. Of course, you'll get copies afterwards, as usual, and then we'll take some questions.
Good afternoon. Yesterday, Monday, May 1st, just before noon, a Sully District Station police officer was out on the Fairfax County Parkway conducting enforcement activity. The officer observed a speeder traveling at 73 in the posted 50-mile-an-hour speed zone and conducted a traffic stop on southbound Fairfax County Parkway, just south of Braddock Road. The officer pulls the vehicle over on the right shoulder, and that's where the video will pick up. And you'll see the officer makes a decision to approach on the passenger side of the car, which many of you have probably seen happen from time to time. That decision will be very consequential as this plays out. But as the officer makes that approach and is having a conversation with the driver, you will notice a vehicle from the north traveling south, so the other side of the road. You'll see the curve and you'll see a car approach at an extraordinary speed, and then the crash will unfold. So we'll show you the video and take some questions from you at that time.
Bravo, Start Me Rescue, Start Me Units, accident right here at County Parkway, south after Braddock. My cruiser was hit, driver was hit. I'm trying to check on injuries.
Yeah, so you'll see that the video goes to black, and we show the words on the screen, the radio transitions that the officer was making. His grace under pressure was, calm, cool, collected. He hops over that guardrail and he immediately gets on the radio immediately. So that's extraordinary. And Chief Blakely will talk about the driver of the striking vehicle and his two passengers. They're all juveniles. They're all under the age of 18, and we can't show them. We can't blur them. So we went to black because we can't depict those juveniles. And then I'll ask, maybe Chief Blakely can lead off with our estimated speed of the striking vehicle and kind of talk you through what you just saw.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. So obviously, through your observation, you could tell that that vehicle that caused this crash was traveling at an extraordinary speed. And in fact, our crash reconstruction detectives have begun the process of analyzing the data that's available in the black box, if you will, on that vehicle, and it was traveling well over 120 miles per hour when it lost control. The vehicle lost control because cars can't go that fast on the highway. And most importantly today, as we talk about this crash and others, a couple things stand out. Number one, I think we need to thank our community members who stopped and tried to help out. Many called today to check on the officer to make sure everything was okay, and I can't thank them enough for their concern. Number two, thanking the men and women of our police department who are out there trying to make our roadways safer. As I know you've heard, nationally, crashes and fatal crashes in particular are up. That's a consistent statistic here in the DMV. And so we're trying very aggressively to lower that. We're doing that in a few ways here in Fairfax County, but we have to call to attention the young drivers, the teen drivers who are responsible for an incredible number of excessive driving or excessive speed related crashes. As I'm sure you'll recall, this year alone, we had 3 high school aged teens who were involved in a double fatal crash in January. We've had even more in 2022, very tragic, and this really should be 3 high school aged teenagers in an incredibly fast car going extraordinarily fast and nearly ended this police officer's life, as well as the driver of the vehicle who was parked on the side of the road talking to this police officer, or someone could have been changing a tire or doing anything else. So I think that's number one. As we talk about teen drivers and our responsibility as parents, community members, educators, to talk to our teen drivers about their responsibility, I want to give you a couple statistics. This year alone, compared to 2022, we've seen an increase by 62% in the number of citations we've issued to teen drivers for speeding. So 62% more tickets to teen drivers for speeding offenses, 98% more for violating signs or signals, so stop signs, red lights, or even the speed limit sign at times, and 181% increase in fail to pay full time and attention, which is often associated with a crash. So we're seeing our teens involved in more and more instances. And Fairfax County today, year to date, we have 8 fatal crash victims, over 7 crashes. 3 of those fatal crash victims were caused because of the driving behaviors of a teen driver this year. So these are statistics we need to pay attention to. And what we're doing in the department to address this is, number one, the 3 E's of traffic safety: education, enforcement, and engineering. We met with all the high school principals in April, on April 20th, to discuss some of these trends and patterns and to ask for their help. We engage Fairfax County Public Schools and try to get into the schools to speak to educators and to the students themselves. We brought back one of our old but reliable programs, Road Shark, which we had our first initiative last month with great success, and we'll be running our second wave June 5th through 11th, where we target enforcement around these types of driving behaviors. And then through engineering, we regularly work with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation as well as VDOT to, as you've seen in the Lee Chapel Road crash, for instance, to address roadway issues. And Fairfax County is also engaged in deploying photo speed enforcement and other projects using all available technology to try to address these issues. So it's something important that we all need to pay attention to, and I just wanted to point those out before we take any of your questions.
Yeah, can you kind of go back to the officer's decision to approach on the passenger side, and kind of what the training is on that, when they do, when they don't, and that's probably the reason I'm guessing that officer is alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Drew. The decision to approach on the passenger side is solely with the officer. And it's this officer has 13 years of experience with the police department. In fact, just completed a competitive process to hopefully one day join our motor squad. He's very invested in traffic safety, has a long and successful history of engaging in traffic enforcement, and all of that experience and training provided him this mindset approach on the passenger side, busy road. But I bet the majority of his stops any particular day don't end up that way. So a lot of it is, when we look at this crash in particular, it's, he chose to run backwards instead of frontwards, or, not jump the guardrail. There's so many little decisions that were made based on his training and experience that likely saved his life. And the passenger side approach is definitely one of them, because his back would have been to traffic, and he probably wouldn't have had the advance notice of that out of control vehicle.
And I guess to kind of elaborate that too, like on a driver's perspective, when you're stopped by a police officer, there's a million things running through your head, everything's making you nervous. Now you see him approaching on this side, you're probably wondering why. Can you talk about, I guess, the tactics, why an officer might choose to do that? Obviously in this situation, they've got a vantage point of the road, they can see traffic, etc. But other reasons why an officer might approach that maybe don't necessarily indicate the driver's doing anything wrong other than speeding.
Sure. Thank you, Drew. And a lot of that's true, especially at night. There are times when officers will choose to approach because in a particular, depending on the context of the traffic stop, that it provides them with a tactical advantage of surprise, right? Everyone's looking in the mirror, looking for someone to approach on this side, and then someone knocks on the window. So it sometimes we train our officers to use that element of darkness to maybe approach quietly and be able to observe in the window if there was weapons or something involved, or if the officer thought so. But we also train our officers on interstate highways or busy roads like this, or if the person just stops a little too close to that fog line, to use this as an approach to make sure that they don't expose themselves to traffic.
So the driver was going over 120 miles per hour. What is the speed limit there on Fairfax County Parkway?
Yeah, so the speed limit on the Fairfax County Parkway is 50 miles per hour. As I mentioned, the officer was actually on a traffic stop for a car going 73 in the 50. That stretch of the parkway between Pope's Head and Braddock Road has an increased number of crashes. You may even remember Pope's Head Road used to have a photo red light. I think the pole was just there until recently from the old legacy program where that section of roadway has always been monitored. So officers are always there doing enforcement. In fact, in March alone, our motor squad has conducted what we call high visibility enforcement, or HIVE. They've conducted a handful of HIVE projects in March and issued over 1,100 tickets and warnings along the Fairfax County Parkway, mainly in that stretch. So it's a very busy stretch of roadway where cars coming off of 66 kind of have no traffic signals ahead of the Pope's Head Road, so speeds are typically higher.
And how old is the teen driver, and any charges, any consequences?
So I can't get into the specifics of the driver, but the driver has been charged with reckless driving, which, as you know, is a Class 1 misdemeanor. It's the most serious driving-related offense that a driver can be charged with, and the juvenile will appear in the Juvenile Domestic Relations Court and have an opportunity to present the case.
Man, I'll kind of add to that a little bit. The dramatic increase in traffic enforcement in Fairfax County in 2023 is very intentional. Our criminal arrests are up 30%. Our traffic citations are up 62%. Our DWI arrests are up 30% because we realize what traffic safety means to Fairfax County. And as our department and other departments come out of this COVID era, where police officers were encouraged only to make traffic stops if it were absolutely positively necessary, we've got to get back into the business of traffic and highway and roadway safety. So this is not going to deter us. We'll certainly look at this, and I'm sure for many, many years to come, long after we're probably gone, this video is going to be used in our Criminal Justice Academy as an example of one of many, many things. The possible potential advantage of a passenger side approach is certainly one of them. And then the other thing, I think, even if this officer would have stayed on the passenger side and he had frozen, because that's a human reaction too, flight or freeze, if he would have frozen, even on that passenger side, he likely would not have survived that impact. Certainly not on the driver's side, but probably not on the passenger side as well. So he made a decision, and I'm sure there's experience behind it. I'm sure it's a lot of it's intuition to move, and he moved. And he moved in the right place at the right time for that split second moment. But even his recovery from that horrific collision was to immediately do a two-step over the guardrail and get right on his radio and calmly describe what had happened. Not a lot of people can pull that off.
For you, Chief, what was your reaction just seeing that video? I mean, we all had video.
Yeah. So we get notifications, as you all get news notifications all day long, and there's a crash here and there's an incident here. So when the crash notification came to me, I'm visualizing something far less than that. And then when we all saw it, we realized how lucky we were. Really, really lucky, really fortunate.
Given the statistics that were laid out, and obviously well over 120 is in a different category, but a message for parents who are teaching their kids to drive, who are getting out on the road now.
So Drew, we were all kind of not to make light of anything that happened yesterday, because it could have been and probably should have been much worse than it was. We were all recounting what our first car was. And mine, for what it's worth, I doubt it's newsworthy, was a 1974 Mustang Ghia with a white vinyl top, manual sunroof, red interior, red exterior, and white walls.
But was it
I had to have the white wall.
Used?
It was used. Thanks for that. Yeah. It was used, and it was slow as molasses. So I think as a parent of four, for parents, and again, this is not lecturing, this is just awareness and education, be really careful about the types of cars that you may purchase or help purchase for your teenagers to drive, because the car involved in that collision yesterday was a whole lot of car for an inexperienced driver. And Chief Blakely can describe the circumstances of the crash much better than I can. But when there was a bend in the roadway, there was no recovery because the car was going way too fast to be even able to negotiate what was probably a slight bend in the roadway. It wasn't a dramatic bend, but it was going way too fast. It was a rocket, and then it became a missile.
Obviously,
Matt?
speed and inexperience as factors. Was there drugs or alcohol or inattention? Was there any other factors contributing to it?
Yeah, so at this time, there's no indication that those other factors were at play. 3 young drivers in a car going fast. Undoubtedly, the driver was distracted. If we just guess. But what we do know is that that vehicle was just incapable of handling that curve at that speed. I don't think any vehicle could handle that curve at that speed. So what you see in the video is really an unprompted loss of control of a vehicle, and that's the critical speed of that vehicle where it just can no longer maintain adhesion to the road. We see that in car races when vehicles enter the road and just curves, and the NASCAR drivers have to get it just right. And that's basically what we see is the vehicle just lose control. That vehicle is equipped with anti-lock brakes. It wasn't a lockup of tires or anything of that sort. So it's just outright reckless driving, and that's where the inexperience piece comes in. And when we see some of these crashes, some of the other more serious crashes that we've talked about, it's drivers making huge mistakes, taking risks that they just aren't fully aware of the consequences. This young driver probably was sitting at Pope's Head and got a green light and gunned it. And if you notice, there was a bit of a gap between the pack of cars that had passed before we see the driver emerge, and probably had some clean road in front of him at full throttle all the way up to that point, and did not judge that curve properly. And so you saw just a complete loss of control. But that's what we see in a lot of these crashes. It's once you're that fast, it's beyond the point of any return or no return, and we see something catastrophic.
And none of those 3 in that car were injured? Were they wearing their seatbelts?
They were wearing their seatbelts. Everyone involved in this crash had what we would describe as minor injuries. The driver of the suspect vehicle, the vehicle that we pulled over for a traffic stop, and the officer were both transported to the hospital and released. The 3 teen drivers were not injured to the extent that they needed transport.
And I guess just lastly, in terms of their health, the officer who responded so quickly, and looks like you say no major physical injuries, this is one day later, how's he doing?
You can imagine I think the chief spoke to the officer. I spoke to the officer a couple times yesterday. Watching the video, I think, was an experience. The officer lived it, but some hours later, leaving the hospital and watching the video and rewinding it and watching it, and I took a couple stills when I watched it, and I mean, it looks like the vehicles at one point are nearly wrapped around the officer. And the officer remembered being kind of hit, but obviously it was just, I mean, when you talk about a matter of inches, I particularly look at the guardrail as you watch this crash a few more times, and you'll notice just as the officer clears and the vehicle makes impact with the car, I mean, it must crush that guardrail 3 to 5 feet. So the amount of force involved in that collision and in that area undoubtedly shook the officer, who was still very able. I think I would have sounded a little differently on the radio. But the officer very professionally started checking on people, controlled the scene, calling for backup. I mean, this is really highlighting the amazing performance of our police officers, and certainly this officer is one of them.
And if there's no more questions, maybe lastly, the connection to Police Week. We always hear more stories, or more often we hear stories repeated that involve a felonious line of death of a police officer. But those always seem to pale in comparison to the number of police officers and troopers and other law enforcement across the country who were killed in the line of duty in traffic-related scenarios. So there's never a good time for something like this to happen, but during this important month of May, to highlight what a close call this was, and to bring attention to the necessity for folks to take a minute. I think that's one of the driving themes when it comes to distracted driving in Fairfax County. Parents need to take a minute and talk to their teen drivers, and we all need to take a minute and make sure that we're not going so fast that we can't control our own motor vehicle.
What's the officer's name?
We're not releasing that now. Like Matt said, Matt, right? He's still kind of probably talking to his friends and family about this, and his adrenaline's probably still at a high level. So at some point in time, we will see if he wants to tell his own story, because it's quite a story for him to eventually tell if he ever gets to that point of comfort. But right now, he's just glad to be alive and hopefully home relaxing with a lottery ticket in his pocket. All right. Thank you all.